Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is James. I am with Able Translations and Able Transport, a company that provides both transportation and helps with communication for patients with their doctors, lawyers, etc. Thank you very much for having me. And I'd like to begin by telling you a story about how I understood what it is that Able does. I had a friend in high school named Dave. And Dave was a star athlete, really great guy, very smart. And for years, he kind of dropped off. And there was different stories about what had happened to him. A few years later, I had the opportunity to meet with Dave. And I asked him, "Can you tell me what went on?" He looked at me and he said, "I should have been immune. I should have never understood what it was to live with such difficulties. But by the time I was 23, I would be a ward of the state. I would be unable to take care of myself. And for 10 years, I would struggle to find an answer to something." I asked him to go on. He explained that during his later years in high school, he had had trouble communicating with family, with friends, etc., despite the fact that they always wanted to be there for him. And one day, a doctor suggested that he and his family go into counseling. And so they did. During one of the sessions, Dave was saying something, and the doctor stopped him, the counselor stopped him, and said, "This is all I can do. You've now shown me something that is beyond my scope. So I'm going to refer you to a doctor, and maybe he can help you." Dave, with his family, went to this doctor. And with the family's input, the doctor saw something that he believed was there. He gave Dave a diagnosis. Said Dave was bipolar. Dave took the diagnosis and he went about his life. He took the medication, everything else. But the difficulties didn't go away. They became harder. The people in his life that he wanted and needed to be there for him had more difficulty being there for him. He was angry. He was confused. He had a lot of issues. At some point, it became difficult for Dave to make it to these appointments, to see a psychiatrist. And under that, the psychiatrist believed that maybe he should see another doctor. But that didn't help with the transportation issue. Getting to these appointments was very difficult for Dave. Bus routes were very confusing. He didn't understand when people talked to him about certain things. And he felt like he was just swimming upstream all the time. And so he kind of just gave up. And for 10 years, Dave lived underneath this misdiagnosis. Life was difficult for Dave. He took jobs that he was vastly overqualified for. And he found it difficult to even get up in the morning. The anger grew. A little while later, what he described as a confluence of circumstances happened. And it would bring him to an enlightenment. He was coming out of the subway, and he passed out, hit his head on the curb. They took him to the hospital. Hospital did a check on him, said everything was physically fine. But there was something more going on. Dave went to his family doctor. Family doctor prescribed a medication to help with some inflammation that the doctor had seen. He began taking the medication. And a month or two in, he started to get massive gut pains in his abdomen. And so he went back to the doctor and he said, "I think there's something wrong with this medication. I don't think I should be taking it." The doctor said, "No, everything is fine. Continue taking the medication." And so he did. 3 more weeks passed. And Dave didn't feel any better. One day, with the aid of his family and some other caregivers that he had, they took him to the hospital. Doctor came in and said, "Can you describe the pain?" He said, it's coming through my back and in my flanks and things like that. And the doctor said, I wish I had another student here because this is textbook gallbladder. That's exactly what this is. I am 100% absolutely sure of it. And so they took the blood work and they went away. About an hour later, the doctor came back and he had a very puzzled look on his face. And he said, have you been in a car accident lately? Dave said, no. And he said, have you been bedridden for a very long time? Dave said, no. Do you play heavy sports? No. And he said, well, there's an indicator in your blood that shows how much proteins are being built up. And it's called CPK. Between 0 and 200 is normal. Over 2,000, you have a 5% chance of going into kidney failure. Over 10,000, you have a 95% chance of going into kidney failure. And Dave said, well, what's mine? He said 9,875. He said 9,875. Dave was literally days away from kidney failure. The doctor mentioned something else about inflammation. He said it's like your body doesn't understand that something isn't inflamed. Dave was puzzled. It was confusing to him. But the word inflammation made sense. And so he said, hey, I'm taking this medication. Doctor looked it over. He said, you got to stop taking that. We're going to flush it from your system. So they put him on an IV drip. And for 4 or 5 days, Dave remained in the hospital. And it flushed this medication from his system. But it also flushed all the other medication from his system. And something happened. He began to feel normal again. He began to understand what had happened over the past 10 years and the struggles that he'd gone through. Then something else happened. He was watching a show, PBS. It was about ADD. And during the show, the presenters described a lot of things that Dave had been struggling with. And he realized this was more like what he had originally went to the doctors and the counselors for. And so he went back to his doctor and he said, I think we got it all wrong. I think I didn't understand the questions you were asking me. And the doctor gave him his best answer and said, we'll try you on this other medication. And it worked. It's as if the lights went on in the room. Things started to make sense for Dave. And it got better. But he still didn't have his answer. And so he kept struggling and he kept looking for it. And one day, he met a doctor. And he described the past sequence of years of what he had experienced to this doctor. This doctor said, I think I can help you. And he said, okay, I'm willing to give it a shot. For 4 days, Dave underwent different tests. Cognitive, understanding, things of that nature. And at the end of it, the doctor called him back. And he said, have you always had trouble communicating, explaining to people what's going on? He said, yes. And he said, would you like to know what's wrong with you? Or what we believe is wrong with you? Dave said, no, I don't want to know. I have to know. I deserve to know. And the doctor said, you're right. Have you ever heard of Asperger's syndrome? He said, no, I hadn't. And he explained all the difficulties that people with autism have in understanding this world. They see the same world, they just see it a little differently. And Dave understood how many of his struggles had been a result of that. Now, what does this have to do with Able Translations and Able Transport? Well, when I started with the company, I thought about that. I thought about Dave. And I thought, what if we'd been able to get Dave to those appointments and he had seen one doctor the entire time who had seen the entire spectrum of what he was dealing with? And what if we'd had somebody there to help Dave with communication, to explain what he was feeling and explain the questions from the doctor in a language he could understand? And then I understood how important it is what we do at Able Translations and Able Transport. We ensure that they get to those appointments on time. We ensure that they're communicated properly. Because if Dave, who I went to high school with, had trouble communicating, what chance does a new immigrant to the country have? Someone who may not have the infrastructure and the support of caregivers. Dave saw the original doctor who had misdiagnosed him some years later. And he told me, he approached him and he said, "I was misunderstood, misdiagnosed, mistreated. But make no mistake, together we overcame." The doctor said, "I think you have one heck of a story." And I believe Dave did. Thank you for your time.